Welcome to the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. I'm Kendra Chapman, your host, and this is the space where we interview fascinating people to find out how they go slow in a fast-paced world. Joining me today is Cynthia Hawk. Cynthia is the founder of Mindful Creative Muse and a leader in the space of mindfulness, creativity, and expressive arts. She has over 15 years of experience reaching students in over 50 countries, and she helps people from educators and artists to entrepreneurs and everyday busy humans. She helps them to slow down, de-stress, and reconnect with themselves through simple, accessible, mindful art practices. She also trains others to bring this work into the world through internationally accredited teacher certification programs, blending creativity, mindfulness, and meaningful impact. In this conversation, we explore how creativity can become a powerful pathway to calm, clarity, and self-expression, and even how the busiest among us can begin to reconnect with that part of ourselves. Let's get started. Well, Cynthia, thank you for agreeing to come and sit down with us today and discuss all things going slow. And before we get started, do you mind just letting our listeners and viewers know a little bit about how you go slow to go fast?
Yeah, so a practice that I've been doing for many years, but it's especially relevant for me these days, is if anyone has ever heard of Julia Cameron and her book, The Artist's Way, she has a morning pages practice that she teaches. And I started that a long time ago, but for the last handful of years, I do what I like to call a morning musings practice or a mindful musings practice. So it combines writing, but also some mindful art making or doodling, noticing my breath. And it's a really brief way that I can do a check-in, and it is really helpful for me to center and ground. So sometimes I do it in the morning, sometimes I do it at other points throughout the day, but it's a pretty consistent practice for me.
That's nice. Nice to hear. I have heard of this morning pages practice before, but I have not, personally, I have not looked into this myself, but it's good to kind of know a few people who do it. So are you somebody that journals? Are you somebody that's kind of into journaling anyway, or have you kind of picked this up along the way?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing since I was much younger. I do a lot with poetry and journaling and, Dear Diary style. So writing, I feel very comfortable with. And then I more so the last 10, 15 years, I really enjoy writing as a response to art making that I'm doing as a way to have a deeper understanding. They always say like a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so being able to create an image first and then make some meaning from those marks is really insightful and something that I enjoy sharing with students too, because sometimes it can feel, if you haven't done that before, it can feel confusing of how do I start making meaning of my marks. And so, yeah, so I love doing it and love also teaching the practices.
I love that because I think writing and art go hand in hand. They can easily complement one another. But I think it's great to hear that you've infused that into your practice. So can you walk viewers and listeners through how you started in your art practice and we'll get to where you are now, but I want to kind of just take everybody back to maybe when you started getting into art.
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed art since I was very, very little. I would say that I had a couple of bigger moments in my life that helped me deepen with the practice where I realized, like, oh, there's actually something to this, to my art making. It's actually really essential to my self care. And that was really two moments, but largely in my late 20s, I was treated for cancer and I had a practice with intuitive collage and writing. And there's so many ways that we can support ourselves when we feel stressed out or overwhelmed or we're struggling with something, or even just in general, when we're, loving life to the fullest. There's different ways we can explore self-care. And that was really a deep moment in my life when I realized the power of art and how supportive and healing it can be. And and something that can be really easily integrated into really busy lives. So once when I was kind of burnt out with corporate America, and then again through cancer treatment, and it's my something I go back to again and again. Yeah, so it's hugely important.
So you've shifted this love for art into a practice that you share. And so, I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit too. But before we go there, you know, is there maybe some, simple creative exercises that busy professionals can think about, like what you said with your burnout, from corporate and then also dealing with a health crisis? You know, is there anything, we'll get into it, but that people could do in just maybe 5-10 minutes a day that can help them kind of reset?
Yeah, I'm actually really passionate about that because a lot of the people I work with say I'm not creative or I don't have time. And so I think so many of us are in that boat. So I have so many different practices I love to share, but I'll share two really simple ones here now. So one is a practice that I call breath doodles, which really combines simple doodling, mark making that anybody can do. You don't need art skills with noticing our breath and actually syncing up the doodles and shapes that we're making with our breath. And it's really a form, I find it's a form of breath meditation. But a lot of people that I've spoken with, if you've tried to meditate before and it's felt difficult or you feel distracted or it's uncomfortable to sit on a cushion with your eyes closed, there's all these different reasons and ways we interpret meditation. This is an easier way in. And so with breath doodles, I have about 20 different shapes and exercises I teach. So each one is slightly different. But essentially, with whatever shape you're making, you're syncing up your breath with that. It's something when I guide it, I also name and invite people to notice the sounds as you're making the marks on the page or how firmly or softly you're holding the pen or pencil in your hand. So I think this is true for anything in our lives. We can do something and we can hurry or rush through it, or we can be distracted, or we can do whatever that practice is in a more intentional way, in a way that we're being kind to ourselves. And so that's a large focus of the breath doodles. And then another practice that I teach, which this one is more commonly known, is a neurographic art technique where when you have lines on the page, you're smoothing out anytime those lines intersect with each other. That one
Hmm.
that is also really, I think, easy and accessible. And I teach other body scan meditations where you're noticing tension in your body or different aspects and then making marks for that as well. But I teach for corporations in their like work wellness programs. So I
Hmm.
share practices that you literally could do with just a pen and paper and something that anybody can do where you don't need to be an artist.
Okay. So this is something you could do, taking a break at your desk or while you're on a webinar or, sitting in a conference situation and you've maybe sat for too long, but you need something. I mean, it seems like it's very accessible in many different ways for lots of different people.
Absolutely. It's so funny. When I was doing my undergrad years ago, I did my bachelor's in psychology and then my master's in the arts. And in my undergrad, my research project that I was doing was all about doodling. And we focused on how there's cave art with doodles, but also how people in college classrooms or people at work, there's this natural um, aptitude or like leaning towards doodling. It's something we do very naturally. And so you literally can do these practices with a pen on a sticky note or on your like notepad that you have in the meeting, or if you're sitting on
Mhm.
a Zoom call, and people might even think you're just taking notes, and you can still be present while doing these doodles and noticing your breath. And actually it can help you be more present to coming back into your body right now and into the present moment,
Yes.
versus distracted thinking about to-do lists, that sort of thing.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I'm somebody who's been a teacher, and I've observed this in the classroom where if kids are engaged, but they might not look like they are, they're following along with you if you allow them to do stuff in the margins or make something, as long as they're not distracting others and and they're actually listening. And you can check that by just, asking them to kind of like on the side, like, okay, what did I just say? Like the last 20 minutes, like, give me a summary. And you'd be surprised if they were actually, if they were doodling or making something and they look off task, they can actually be right with you as long as their hands are busy. And so that was something I definitely keyed into what you were saying. I would be somebody that would be doodling just naturally. So I guess there's many of us out there. And this would be a great strategy just to kind of think about incorporating if you haven't already done that into your practice.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's good to know that there are structured strategies for things like this. So I'm thinking like the adult coloring book that was kind of a popular craze, and there's lots of people that get the fancy markers or lots of different colors, and they are pencils, and they like to bring that with them, maybe to work, or they do that on the side when they're on the phone or whatever. But take me, kind of into your process of how you started down the path of, blending the art with therapy.
Yeah, so a couple of different things around that. So the most of the practices I teach, I like to call it mindful art activities or sometimes mindful art and meditation. So I do like to be really clear that it's not practicing like art therapy just for anybody doing practices at home. So if they're looking for art therapy, I always recommend finding a therapist. And
Mm,
it can feel really therapeutic for ourselves. I think that the coloring books are so interesting. There's pros and cons to using those as well. What I've found
mhm,
with a lot of students I've worked with is you can use a coloring book and then feel kind of boxed in by the lines. Like in a way, you can just color in the lines and you don't have to think
mhm,
about what to put on the page. And in another way, it doesn't really feel like marks that are yours. Or we can fill in colors on a coloring page and still actually be very distracted. We can feel
mhm,
stressed and thinking about a to-do list. So for me, with the art making and combining it with mindfulness, and I know that term is used so often nowadays, so I think most people have heard of it. But for anybody who's not familiar with the term, it's really just coming back to the present moment. With the key part is as much non-judgment as possible, and as much kindness towards ourselves. And so
mhm,
so for me, I had a track of exploring the arts and having a mindfulness and meditation practice separately for many years. And then I actually struggled with some of my art making where I would be really harsh towards what I was creating. I would have a lot of
mhm,
critical thoughts about what I made. I was doing art in the school system, in my college years. And so what I was creating was getting graded. And so I had this like inner judgment around the marks I made. And then when I was creating things not for my classrooms, just for myself, I noticed I could create with more ease. I enjoyed it more. It was much more healing, therapeutic for
mhm,
myself, supportive. And I was just curious one day, look, why is this so different? And I realized that I had naturally started to bring in my practice of mindfulness and meditation when I was doing it for myself. But when I was presenting to someone else, I dropped into a different space. And so I started looking at, after I had the cancer treatment and some other like things in my life, I started looking more intentionally of how can are there structured practices to bring these together? Is there science to support it? Why am I feeling one way when I'm creating in one way and not the other? And it really led me down a path to doing a lot of research and study. And so I have a lot of certifications and trainings. And then I've also created now, about 10 years ago, I created an internationally accredited mindful art and meditation teacher training because there hasn't been something that intentionally combines it in a structured way. And we can do that. It's actually scientifically supported. So it was a very winding road, but
mhm,
it's something I continue to use and implement all the time when I'm creating art. Because as a foundation, it's a very different. I love that you reflected back that it's a practice. It's a very different
mhm.
practice if we're being kind to ourselves and in the present moment versus if we're having that inner critic come in or comparing ourselves to others, or it can be a big barrier to starting or even enjoying the practice of making art.
Yeah. I mean, I can think back to being very critical myself of my own art in school. I mean, I took classes. My art teacher was always very complimentary, but I was always like, you know, worst critic. So
Mhm.
you spoke a little bit about that. Like, how can we kind of notice that and then deal with that inner critic, that it's a very critical voice if we allow it to take over. So what have you learned through that process that just kind of reframe it and do differently?
Yeah. So I'll say first and foremost that I feel like it's just part of being human. That I've heard people say try to eradicate the inner critic or banish, get rid of the inner critic. And I
Yeah.
feel really differently about it. I feel like the inner critic is another part of us that's really just trying to keep us safe in some way. With creativity, we naturally are doing something outside of our comfort zone. And so we're stretching our edge into something different. And sometimes different can feel unknown or scary or we're unsure. And so the inner critic can come in as a way to protect us. And so I have a different feeling about it instead that it's something, a part or a voice that we've now internalized that we can notice and again
Hmm.
be kind towards and empathetic or compassionate, and that by having that kind of team approach, like I'm going to hear you and I'm going to be kind to myself and still then move forward, still take that next small step. Um, that voice can soften. It doesn't go away fully, but I find that that
Yeah.
voice can soften. And then basically the inner critic isn't running the show. Our creativity, I usually call it our inner muse. We can tap into that place of our creativity, that voice within us that wants to express ourselves. So some of the ways that I usually encourage people to notice that with bringing in the mindfulness is one, we have to have enough space to actually catch when that voice is coming in.
Mm.
And that's partially why there is, when I'm sharing the practices, I am inviting or asking or offering cues to notice what is happening with our thoughts. Are you thinking about a deadline tomorrow? Are you judging that mark you just made, there's a wobbly line and you can't erase it because it's pen and you're feeling frustrated? Like just to
Mm.
simply notice. The breathing, bringing in the breathing can be really helpful as well because by focusing on the breath and by even sometimes elongating our exhale, that can help to calm our nervous system. It can help reassure ourselves that we are safe in this moment.
Mhm.
It's really interesting what can happen when we have those inner thoughts that we can start to have like a little inner panic actually, or inner stress response. And we know just physiologically we can't be in a stress state as well as a creative state at the same time. We could bounce
Mm.
back and forth between the two, but they don't coexist in the same space. And so having these techniques to be kind to ourselves and also notice our breath and regulate our breath can naturally just soften that a little bit so then we can move forward. And then I always recommend doing the next smallest thing. What's the next smallest step that you can take? And that also can help with inner critical thoughts.
Mhm. Because, I can think of listeners and viewers out there who are listening to our conversation and thinking, "Well, I can't even draw a stick figure. I'm just not
Mhm.
creative." And so that's already kind of got your inner critic walls up. And then thinking about, art as a creative practice that can help and regulate your stress levels might not be something that somebody would want to try, but like you said, you can't be in that like stress space and be creative at the same time. So it's good to know it could help kind of alleviate those feelings if you just try to do
Mhm.
something creative. So, if somebody's, maybe listening, thinking they're not an artist, what would be your suggestion to try something out? Just besides the doodling, which you mentioned, what would be some another idea or step they could try?
Yeah, so I'll share a practice. I actually just taught this yesterday. And I'm bringing it up because it's so exactly what you're saying, that feeling of I'm not an artist. I can't even draw a stick figure. I feel, I'm feeling uncomfortable. So yesterday I taught for a work wellness event at a university for their staff. And so we had 300 not live on the call, but they have 300 staff that will see the recording. We had a smaller group on the call, and a large majority of the people attending would not associate themselves as being creative. And so I had shared one practice, we talked about it, and the number one thing that people said that they were feeling is they noticed like a self-consciousness at the thought of even starting. So the practice that I shared yesterday is to simply take, you can do this with like a sheet of computer paper. So any paper unlined preferably. So taking the paper, just noticing as you hold the paper, feeling the texture of the page, perhaps the smoothness of it. And then if you're feeling stressed that day, you can literally crumple the page. You can almost imagine you're putting the stress into the page as you crumple it. And then uncrumpling the paper, you'll notice that there's a lot of texture and lines already on the page. And what I encourage is for you to simply start tracing the different lines that you see on the page. And it makes me think of kind of a reverse way of doing a coloring book. When we're doing coloring books, we're drawing within the lines that are already there. This adds an extra layer of imagination because you and I could have the exact same sheet of paper and we're going to see and draw and highlight different lines. You can add colors, you could color in the shapes. What I find, and we talked about it afterwards, is that so many people felt so much more relaxed that they could drop in and start right away because it removed the initial step of how do I even begin? I'm worried what it's going to look like. I think another key part about mindful art practices is we're not making the art for a grade. We're not making the art to hang it up on the wall or sell it, although you could always do those things. It really is another form of self-care. We're doing it for ourselves to be kinder, to relax, for stress relief. And so, so we ended up doing that practice for about 20, 30 minutes together. And it's really, really so simple. So I use different methods like that help us begin where you don't have, the inner critic doesn't even come in typically in that type of situation.
Okay. I can think back. Math used to stress me out, but I want to have a similar conversation with a math friend of mine who really talks to people about how you just, some people just identify themselves as not a math person. So that's why I wanted to bring that up, because there are people out there that identify as not an artist or not an artsy person or a creative person. But I think we all have that inside of us, just like we probably all appreciate math in some way because we like to get paid, right? As adults. So I'm thinking, I can remember when I would get stressed out about math, and this is where I'm going to link it. And I used to, like on the side of the page, I would just dot my pencil and make a bunch of, dot marks all along the side of the page. And then I would start connecting the dots and then see what kind of image would come forward. I see that as kind of similar to what you're saying. You crumple up a piece of paper and then you figure out where the shapes are and start making art. So really it can look as simple as that. And the benefits are sounding like you're sharing. It's pretty positive if you just try a few of those strategies and see how you feel. So, what might be the next step for somebody if they're looking to maybe work with you or maybe look into an art program? What would be some suggestions that you would like to kind of share with the viewers and listeners out there?
Yeah, so I have a free workbook that's called Mindful Art for Self-Care that anyone is welcome to download. I can share the link. It's about 13 pages long and it includes 5 additional practices that'll walk you through different practices, shares a bit more information about what is mindful art and some of the benefits. So that's something that's very easy. I have on my website also at mindfulcreativemuse.com, I have a resources page that has a lot of different articles, videos, book recommendations. Like it's kind of a whole little mini section if you're curious to learn more. I think that the key part that I mention a lot to my students, and one of the biggest things I hear students say when they work with me is having getting into some type of practice is really where you start to see the most benefits. It's similar to like if you go to the gym. If you go one time and then you never go again, we're not building those muscles. And so similarly with a mindful art practice, the more we do the practice, even if it's 5 minutes a day, I'm very big on you can just do it for 5 minutes a day. The more that we do that practice, the more I've noticed, and I hear from students, that we start to see those benefits outside of that moment when we're on the page. It actually
Mm,
translates out into the world where we start to notice, when am I having inner critical thoughts? When am I starting to feel really stressed? When am I holding my breath and I'm feeling, an unease? And ways that you can soften and be kinder to yourself, even without the art in those moments. And so it's something that I encourage. If you look at the workbook and those practices, you can start to see practices you could do daily. And then, of
mhm,
course, I have more in-depth classes and teacher trainings for people that are wanting more support. But I think that's a really great starting point, just to get more information and try it out. I often say it's like going to a buffet, and you can try and
mm.
taste different things and then see what resonates with you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that you have lots of options for people to explore
Mhm.
because, I think there is an artist in all of us. We just have to tap into that energy and I can remember in 2020, a lot of people were making bread and doing things at home, during COVID, um, lockdown that, we were starting to kind of discover talents that either we explored when we were children and we wanted to kind of come back to, or new talents, new things that we thought were interesting because we were bored. But I think boredom does create that creativity. And so just want to put that out there to everybody that while we're not on a lockdown anymore and winter is over, we're recording this at the beginning of spring, but hopefully you'll find a little, energy, inspiration to do something different and make some art, create something. I think we're all makers, really.
Yeah, and I feel so passionately too that with how much screen time we all have these days, how much we're consuming, it's also a really nice like counterpoint or way to balance out. Instead of consuming, that we can create, and instead of being on screens, we can be with pen and paper. There's something that is so
Hmm.
deeply satisfying and supportive for ourselves, just that little shift, even in small pockets of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. It's great for our nervous system too, it sounds like. So,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right. So, you shared a little bit about what you do to kind of start your day. Do you create art as well, on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I've been and I would say I was an artist well before I was a meditator and even before being a teacher. So I was an
Mm,
artist first. So I think, like many artists or people who feel really creative, I tend to not stick with one practice. So I really prefer 2D media. So I like drawing, painting, photography, collage. I tried 3D media like with sculpture once, and
mhm,
I do much better with 2D media, just how my brain works with my hands.
mhm,
So I tend to, now any of the practices I do, still I bring in mindfulness and meditation, but the materials I use and what it looks like is changing and always evolving.
mm,
The last handful of years, 5 years or so, I've done a lot of watercolors and inks.
mm,
Prior to that, I did oil painting many years ago, and I was like, "Oh,
mm.
I'll never work with watercolors because I just make a big muddy mess." And it's just so
Yeah,
interesting how we change,
evolve. Yeah.
yeah, and evolve. But
Mhm,
lately, especially the last month or so, especially, I've been doing very, very, very simple doodles with pen, and I think that's probably
mm,
because I have had so much happening in my world and have been so busy that that is the easiest, most accessible way for me to step in as well. And so
mhm,
um, I think there can be a myth around being an artist that it needs to be complicated, and
mhm.
it can be really simple. And so, yeah, so pen and paper has been my go-to for a while. Mhm.
Do you keep that all kind of in a portfolio and then kind of look back at, like, what you've done over the years or over months? Because 'Cause I'm somebody that keeps journals, and I have a few portfolios, but I have a son who he'll just take computer paper and start doing something. And then we have piles of it everywhere around the house. And I'm like, we need to put that into a collection.
So I typically I create art the same way I read books. I read
Uh,
multiple books at the same time, usually
uh-huh.
nonfiction, and
Uh,
audiobooks as well. And when I create, I have multiple art journals and pads of paper going at the same time because it depends which practice I decide I want to do. I
mm-hmm.
occasionally, if I really want to create something and I don't have anything else around me, I will just do it on a scrap piece of paper and then I'll bring that and I'll add it into my like folder that I have.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yep.
so it's a little bit mixed, but I tend to
Yeah.
have more than one art journal going at the same time. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually recommend that a lot of times for folks, whether you're an
Okay.
artist or not. I think it can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful to have a couple of options. So
Mm-hmm.
for two reasons. One, you can choose different ones if you're traveling or different sizes. It can change it up. But also, sometimes when I'm doing a practice, I'll stop just before finishing. So then when I come back the next day or the next week, uh, it's easier for me to pick up on that momentum. Because sometimes if we finish creating something in its entirety, when we come back to it, we're kind of starting from scratch again. We're starting over.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I like to stop just before. So I
Hmm.
have a pickup point. And
Okay.
I've heard that can be helpful for dropping it back into a flow state more easily.
And that flow state is something that I've been, really wanting to research a little bit more because you know it when you're in it, you feel it, right? It's just you're getting inspired and you're creating, and it could look different for everybody. But I think the more we're in that flow state, it's definitely a great feeling. And so to maximize that, that's a neat idea to be able to not finish a project, and it's okay because it's
Yeah.
actually going to help you pick it up again. Okay. Good
And
to
one
know.
thing I've heard about flow state also is that it's kind of finding that sweet spot for you of what are you doing that feels interesting enough that it really captures your attention and interest, but it's not so difficult that you get frustrated and you want to stop or you have a lot of pressure. And it's not too easy where you start feeling bored or you start to check out, you get uninterested. So it's really finding
Yeah.
that sweet spot space. And I hear from a lot of people I work with that do mindful art that it helps to find that flow because you're removing the pressure and it's
Mm,
easy, but it's novel and it's unique and it's new every time. And so it kind of finds that balance point for a lot of
mm,
people. Mhm.
interesting. I wonder, I'm going to go off on all these tangents and just wonder if you can get to that flow state, like you said, without finishing a project all the way. But also, I'm wondering if you mix up what you're doing often enough, can you hit that flow state more often? Kind of interesting. Mm,
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For the longest time, when
mm,
I was working on larger canvases with painting, I would always have multiple canvases going at the same time because if I got to a sticking point on one of them, I could
mhm,
switch to the other canvas and then continue with more ideas and then I could switch back. So there was, I think for me in that example, it was a way that I was removing one of the barriers or like
mhm,
pressure or block, and so I think there's lots of different ways we can do that for ourselves, but that I think that can
mm.
be helpful to keep in mind what can you do to simplify things and so you can keep moving forward and stay in that flow or drop in that flow.
Yeah. Because if you do this as for a living, it can definitely become a pressure point of always having to be creative. But if you're doing this for fun, then hopefully you can tap into that flow more often and just be creative and see what happens, right?
Yeah, I like to
Yeah.
really, I think that's why I like working in art journals now too, and why I teach in art journals a lot. Because for your own personal practice, I find it is really accessible and it does remove that pressure. It makes me think of when, like, many of us had a Dear Diary when we were younger,
Hmm.
something that was just for us. We didn't need to show it to other people. It was a safe place you could go to and just kind of outpour on the page. And I see it so similar with mindful art journaling. And so, yeah, if anyone listening is curious, I encourage you to have a really small, inexpensive journal and a pen to start, and maybe start with the workbook. Or I have some videos on YouTube at Mindful Creative Muse as well that you could experiment and, try small things things. The other thing I do as well, and I still do this and I teach it, is I'll set a timer and I'll
Hmm.
set, if I think one thing that can happen is we can feel like not only am I not good enough or I'm not an artist, but I don't have the right supplies or I don't have enough time. And so, literally setting a timer for 5 or 15 minutes and just working, just creating for that amount of time. And it's amazing how much better I feel in 5 minutes doing a mindful art practice.
Yes. And you mentioned this at the beginning that you had um, dove into this process a little bit more, from being burnout in corporate and then also dealing with a cancer treatment. So, have you found that your health and everything is so much better with doing this process? Like, how are you feeling on that front?
So I find that honestly feel like a different person if I do my
Mm,
practice or I don't do my practice. I know there's the cliche of like secure your own oxygen mask first. And I think
hmm.
cliches are there like rooted from truth a lot of times. And so for me, when I'm teaching, I often say mindful art equals connection. It's a connection point to myself, to my breath, to notice how am I feeling right now in this moment, to help soften any of ruminating thoughts or distracted thoughts I have, to soften with my breath and my body. And it's really
Hmm.
like a reset practice for me that I can notice, the same way if I do, because I still do meditation practice without art as well. So similarly, if I do a
Hmm.
meditation practice and my eyes are closed and I'm doing that for 20 minutes, it can change the entire rest of the trajectory for the day for me. And so, yeah, so I noticed that absolutely. I think the other thing with mindful art that I notice is if I am struggling with something, like as an example, when I had health struggles, it also is it's not to eradicate or magically somehow those health struggles are suddenly gone, but what it
Right.
also does is it's kind of like I see it as a companion. It was an additional support additionally to friends and family or my
Hmm.
therapist or community circles. It was another way that I could offer support for myself, and that was just right there. It's just my journal away that I could have next to my bed anytime. So
Hmm.
so I've found that to be really lovely as well, just as something else to put in our self-care toolkit.
I love that. Yeah. And I've always kind of thought it's okay to have a messy stack of books going on my bedside. And so I need to think differently about art journals as well, and maybe not get on my son so much, having them all over the house. Yeah. But it's all good because it's good for his mental health as well.
Yeah, and maybe he has a little I have a blog post around creating like an art corner in your house or having an
Hmm.
art tape. Like not everybody can have a whole room dedicated to art, but having
Yeah.
maybe a corner in your house or a little stand, like a small bookshelf that has everything, or even
Hmm.
I have a travel pouch that has some of my favorite pens and markers with a small journal, and I
Hmm.
can grab that anytime. So I think there are ways, even if you're working in multiple if you're creating in multiple journals, you can still
Yeah.
maybe have it organized in a little spot
In a
or
little spot.
a little
Yeah.
balance. I don't know.
We do that about once a week. We bring everything back together and then start over, but
Nice.
it's all good.
Yeah.
I mean, we're working with clay, we're doing stuff with paper. Yeah, very creative, which is great. I want to foster that. I want to, you know, encourage. So, any parents out there, I hope that you feel inspired to encourage your kiddos to do the same as well as yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have
Okay.
a lot of students that do the breath doodle practices with their kiddos at home. I train like K through 12 teachers how to share in the classroom, but I also have a
Hmm.
lot of parents that just do the breath doodle practices at home. And I know you mentioned COVID earlier. I had a woman that came to one of my online classes, which is kind of like a reverse coloring with watercolor and tracing
Hmm.
the shapes in the watercolor. And her son, who was 7 at the time and had been having a lot of tantrums because of COVID,
Hmm.
saw her do the practice, started doing the practice himself. Like he'd come home from school and the first thing he'd do is go up to his room to do that practice. And he slept better and he had less tantrums.
Yeah.
And it's such a, I mean, I've had students that have been itty bitty all the way up to over 80 years old. Like it just needs to be modified for the age, but it's really
Hmm.
accessible. Mhm.
Yeah, especially if you enjoyed doing it when you were a child and you haven't done it in a while, just think about it differently because I think we need to tap into that side. It's going to be helpful for us.
Mhm.
We can
It's
just
true.
add that into if we do a meditation, we go for a walk and do a little art. It's just a different way to think about it. Your daily practice. I love that.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, this has been a great conversation, Cynthia. Do you have anything else that you want to make sure we hear about the practice of mindful art before we wrap up this conversation?
I think just to piggybacking off of what we've kind of said already, that I do feel like all of us are creative in our own way, and to give ourselves permission to create in a way that doesn't have pressure, that's really simple and easy, I've found to be really supportive. And so just to name that as a possibility that maybe mindful art is that thing for you of how you can step back into it, and maybe it'll spark curiosity somewhere else as well. But yeah, happy creating to everybody.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure Cynthia's contact information and all of her work in the world is captured in our show notes so you can find out more about her if you're curious. And hopefully you'll be creative in your next, steps forward. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. And what I really loved about our conversation, not only was it organic, and we got a little bit of an idea of how we can add art into our everyday life to really calm our stress and regulate our nervous system. But it's also a great reminder that creativity isn't something reserved for a select few. You don't have to be an artist. You may think that you're somebody who can't draw a stick figure, and that's okay. Art is something that we all have access to. And when we allow ourselves to slow down, even for a few moments, to create and reflect and simply be, we open the door to a deeper sense of calm, clarity, and connection. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to take one small step this week. Pick up a pen, some paper, or paint, and just pause and notice what wants to come through, and then see where you go from there. And it's just for you. Nobody's going to see it unless you want to show them. So thank you for being here, for choosing to slow down in a world that moves really fast. And as always, remember, the artist in me honors the artist in you. And as you head into the rest of your week, let your light shine through. Go slow to go fast, and thanks for listening.